Hi my lovelies, welcome back to my channel, and today is Vlogmas day 21. Now recently, and I will link it up above in the cards here, I did a video, a Vlogmas video, and in it I talked about, I talked about, I kind of reminisced a little bit about childhood and Christmas and the Christmas presents that we had. And I talked about what we had in our stockings, although the stocking back then was a pillowcase, wasn't it? And I've absolutely loved reading all your comments, and it really doesn't matter which part of the world we're in, you know. Our Christmases, if you are sort of an age, and I'm in my 60s, they've all been very similar, and I was making a lot of comparisons from back then to what it's like now for children. Carried on a lot of the traditions into bringing up my own children, and obviously tweaked it a little bit, and they had obviously had more as a sign of the times. And then going on, I was talking about what some children have today, and you know, like my grandchildren and everything. But today I want to talk to you about the food that we had back then. Now I can remember, I was brought up by my nan, my granddad as well for a while until he passed away, but he was in the army, so he wasn't always home anyway. So a staple diet in our household was, we would have a roast on a Sunday. It could be chicken. Now my nan, she kept chickens, and obviously I was young, I wasn't really aware of where the chickens may have come from that were on my plate. Thank goodness I didn't know. But it would be a roast. It could have been beef, it could have been pork, it could have been anything. Anyway, so we'd have a roast on a Sunday, and then Sunday tea time would be very traditional, and it would be sandwiches, it would be a cake that my nan would have made. If we'd had beef, then there would have been bread and dripping on the table as well. And my nan would always put a little bit of salt on, and you know, if she put the dripping on my bread, it'd be a little bit of salt put on that as well. And a blancmange. There would always be either a jelly or a blancmange. I don't even know, do they still? I'm sure they must do blancmanges these days, but I certainly haven't made one in donkey's years. I mean, I carried on that tradition when I had my own children, and our Sunday tea time was exactly that. It was the same sort of thing, without the bread and dripping, mind you, but it was sandwiches, and I do a trifle, or you know, that sort of thing, a whole traditional sort of Sunday tea, afternoon tea. And yeah, it was, and then on a Monday, now Monday was wash day, and my nan would only do the washing once a week, and that was on a Monday. She'd get the old boiler out, she'd light it underneath, and then it would heat up and warm the water up, and then she'd start off with, she'd put the whites in, then the colours, and then the darks would all go into the same water, and then it would all be sort of pulled out and rinsed, and then it would go through a mangle, and my nan would be doing this, and she'd be feeding it through, I'd be the other end sort of catching it. And yeah, so that was the washing. Drying was a whole different blooming ball game. It would be all around the house trying to dry. Of course, no radiators back then or anything. It was coal fire and a paraffin heater on the landing just to keep the chill off. I think it was pink paraffin. I'm sure it was pink paraffin back then. Oh, Sundays, if we talk about Sundays again, I've digressed a bit, but Sundays was bath night. My bath first, and she had like this water heater that came out over the bath with like on an arm, and the hot water would come out from there, so that had to be heated up, and then the hot water would come out of there. So I'd have my bath first, and then my nan would get in my bath water. And she always treated me to a bath cube. Do you remember the old bath cubes? And it would invariably be Lily of the Valley as well. So yeah, she'd get in my water, and then for the rest of the week it would be a lick and a promise. Oh, I'd have my hair washed that day as well. And then after that it would be a spoonful of molasses, a spoonful of cod liver oil, a spoonful of vitamin blah blah blah, a spoonful of arrowroot, a spoonful of everything to keep the old pollutions going. Oh, but yeah, food wise, so then on a Monday, as I say, it was wash day, and she would we'd either have like cold cuts and say mashed potato or something, or because it was wash day and she'd have like a great big pan of water boiling on the stove, and that would be for like the whites that she had to keep pristine white, you know. So sometimes what she would do is she'd make like a suet pastry, like a suet pudding pastry, and it would have a Torah suet in it, and she would roll that out, and then she'd cut up all the bits of the meat that were left, if there wasn't a whole load of it left, and she'd scatter it, lay it all out over this pastry, and then roll it up so it became a little bit like a Swiss roll type of thing, and then she'd tie that into a greased piece of old sheet that she had. So if the sheet started to go into a hole, she'd cut them up. I'll tell you what else they were used for in a minute as well. Gosh. But she'd cut them up, and she'd like lay greaseproof paper on it and grease that as well, and then she'd put like this suet roll in there, and she'd roll it up and she'd tie the ends, or she would make a put it in a basin, a pudding basin, and she'd put a covering of foil over that and tie that up, and that would be put into a saucepan next to the pan that was boiling with the whitewashing in, and the house would just smell of food, it would smell of washing, but it was just once a week she ever did like the suet puddings. We always had eggs, because where we had chickens. Fruit and veg just wasn't an issue because we had a big enough garden. She had fruit trees, and we had a greenhouse down the bottom, so we had all the fruit and veg that was homegrown. Oh, we had regularly, we'd have liver and onions, and if we were lucky it would be liver, bacon and onions. An awful lot of just boiled potatoes as well. Breast of lamb back then was as cheap as chips. It's not anymore, is it, guys? It really isn't. Oh, and oxtail, that was the other thing. We used to have a lot of oxtail. If you try getting oxtail now, you have to 9 times out of 10 actually go to a butcher's or go to a supermarket where they've got a butcher's, and you're very lucky if they actually keep oxtail in, because it's a cut of meat that you have to order in, and it's not cheap anymore either. Oh, heart, that was another thing, stuffed heart. Just do the old sage and onion stuffing and stuffing the heart and roast them, and then she'd, you know, slice them up so it'd be like the heart and the stuffing in the middle. But I tell you what, I never went hungry, and it got me used to all the wholesome foods, and stews, that was another thing, and the suet dumplings. You know, it could be a beef stew, it could be a chicken stew. You know, just really, really wholesome food, and I remember it all so fondly. And of course, back then we didn't have a fridge either, but what she had was she had a big pantry, and it was on the outside wall of the house. It was a semi-detached house, so the outside wall is where the pantry was, and the top part of the pantry had like a little window, but it didn't have glass in it. It had just like very tiny mesh so that the cold air could come in there and keep what you had in there nice and fresh and cool. And I think the 2 top shelves were marble, so things like the cheese and the butter, because it was proper butter, the block butter, that was all kept on the top 2 shelves in the pantry, on the marble shelves, sort of right under the vent, the mesh, you know, from outside, and that kept everything cool. In fact, it was that cool in there that that's when my nan used to set the jellies and blancmanges and everything. I could go on and on for hours, so I don't want to bore you guys too much, but if you want me to do more of these, just let me know. Blackberrying, we used to go blackberrying and come back and do like blackberry and apple pie, blackberry and apple jam, blackberry and apple crumbles. Just lovely, lovely memories, you know, of clean food. It wasn't processed, it was just clean food. What else did we have? Pudding wise, it would have been things like jam roly-poly, which again is like a suet pastry again, with custard. It would have been spotted dick, same sort of thing again, but with the currants in, sultanas in, baked apple. We had a lot of baked apple because obviously we had apple trees, and so my nan would just core the apple, put them on a little baking tray, and then she'd pop some fruit like currants and sultanas and that inside of where the core came out from the apple, bake those. It would have been jam tarts. We had a lot of jam tarts because we used to make them, or she used to make them and I used to help. Mincemeat tarts, mince pies at Christmas. I just loved it. And when my granddad came back, you know, of course he was like head of the household, and the bread invariably would be an uncut loaf. So it would be on the breadboard on the table with the butter dish next to it, and there would be the bread knife and then the butter knife, and my granddad would be the one who would slice all the bread, and you weren't allowed to talk at the table, you weren't allowed to reach in or anything. You had to wait until he'd passed it around. And yeah, he was a lovely man, but he was brought up a little bit Dickensian, you know, whereas if they talked they'd get the bread knife over their knuckles. Well, he didn't do that, but I think the threat of it was always there. Cabbage water, when my nan did the veg on a Sunday, she would pour the cabbage water into a jug. Some of it would go back into the gravy, which was not instant gravy, of course, back then. It was made up with the meat juices, maybe a little bit of gravy browning and a little bit of corn flour, and then into the baking pan that the meat was cooked in, and then you cook it over on top of the stove, which is what I like to do. Some of the time, I don't do it all the time, but I do it at Christmas and just when I fancy it, really. And then, what was I saying? Yeah, the cabbage water, and then she'd save some to drink, for us to drink, and we'd have to drink. Oh, it was disgusting, I hated it. But it was to keep your complexion clear. And do you know what? I was one of these kids that I never grew up with spots. I don't know if it was that or if it was just sheer luck, but I didn't have spots as kids. I literally just had, like, as I got older and I sort of started, you know, started to have periods and that, I'd just get 1 or 2 spots that would come up every month in the same place, sort of usually on my chin, but I was not a spotted kid. Yeah, and I'm just going back again, because as I say things, I then remember other things, and I was saying to you about my nan boiling up the whites on the top of the cooker, and yeah, we weren't fortunate enough, talking about periods, we did not have, back when I first started, we didn't have sanitary towels. My nan used to, you know, when the bed sheets used to go a little bit thin down by the heel of your fur and they'd wear a little bit, well, she would then, that sheet would then be cut into goodness what, loads of different rags. It would be dusters, it would be a floor cloth, it would be a rag for this, it would be a rag for that, and then it would be cut into long sections like this, quite wide, but sort of, you know, that sort of length, but lots of it, or quite a lot of it, and then they would be boiled, they would be ironed, but they would be ironed by being folded over. So if you imagine the width of a sanitary towel, they would be folded and folded and folded and folded, so they looked like a sanitary towel, and then they would be ironed on the top again and the bottom, so that they were a nice, neat sanitary towel shape. And then they would be all put together and put in a pile and put in the airing cupboard, ready for when it was the time of the month. And then what you'd have would be a safety pin, a big safety pin, not one of the tiny little ones, but ones that are sort of about so long. And you'd have a safety pin, and they would be safety pinned into the front of your knickers and the back of your knickers. And I tell you now, and I kid you not, that is what I had when I first started my periods. Yeah. And of course, there was no like plastic layer underneath or anything, so can you imagine, it was something that you were constantly changing. And then you had to keep them at home, you had to take them home, and then they would be soaked in like a Milton solution in a bucket, and then they would be boiled, and so the whole cycle would start all over again. Honest to goodness, our kids, they've got no idea if they are lucky they've got it. Mind you, I wouldn't wish that on my enemy. But yeah, it does make me appreciate the things that I've got. What else can I talk about in the way of sweets? In the way of food, licorice. I had a load of licorice. Yeah, I had a lot of licorice back in the day. And then of course we had the butcher counter around at the little general store, which everybody had a general store near them. And then there was also like a pub next door with an off-licence part to it, and then it would have the public bar, it would have the lounge bar, and the ladies would not be allowed into the public bar. They had to go into like the snug bit, the lounge bit. And I can remember literally across the road from the pub and the little store was where I used to go to a house for piano lessons. Goodness me. And because the rag and bone man would come along as well, wouldn't he? And the horse would do its business out in the streets, and so all the grown-ups were out there shoveling up the horse poo for manure for the roses. It always went on the roses in the garden. We'd have the baker would come round, and as they pull it, he might bib the horn or something, and then just to let you know that the baker's there, and he'd come round to your door, and you know, you put your order, you take your order, or you just say what you wanted, because he had a load of bread in the basket on him. And there was the fizzy pop man as well, the Corona man, and you used to get money back on the bottles as well. And I used to love going around some of my neighbours saying, if you've got any fizzy pop bottles that you don't want, and they'd give them to me, and then I'd get a little bit of money back on those when he came round. And then, we had the veg man as well, the fruit and veg man, but we didn't use them a lot because we were growing it in the garden. But, you know, if there was something that wasn't in season and the veg man came round and he had it, of course my nan would buy it. The life insurance man, Liverpool Victoria I think it was, yeah, the life insurance man will come round. They used to come round, didn't they, and empty the gas and electric meters as well. Gosh, we progressed. I can remember progressing from the little tiny telly that we had, the little black and white telly, that when the colour TVs came out, we had one that we rented. I think it was from Radio Rentals, and we had to put money in the back of that. You'd be halfway through flipping the programme, and sometimes the money would run out, or you couldn't get any more money in because you'd filled it up and you were waiting for it to come and be emptied. Oh dear, I could go on and on. And do you remember your nan or your mum out on the front doorstep, and they'd be doing the old, what do they call it, reddening the doorstep and everything, putting the old red stuff down, like a red paint type stuff on the tiles, and then with the brasso, and they'd be brassing up the door knocker, wouldn't they, and where the little key went. And the outside of the house was kept as lovely as the inside of the house. And I remember my nan's curtains, she always displayed her curtains so that the best side was looking out, so that when people went by they could see how nice the curtains were. And not like nowadays, we have the good side on the inside because we want to enjoy those, but back then it was like the outside, the good side of the curtain was on the outside of the windows. So funny when you think back, isn't it? Crikey, I could go on and on, guys, so I'm going to stop because I'm like, my brain's going 10 to the dozen here, and I'm thinking about sweets, I'm thinking about clothes, I'm thinking about cooking, I'm thinking about all the different things that are coming in. So if you want to know any more, put it in the comment down below. I'd love to know what your memories are. I really loved reading all your comments last time, and it reminded me of things I'd forgotten about, and then you'd say something and I'd be, oh yeah, my god, I did that as well. So I'd love it if you could, and if you want to hear more, just let me know. If you have enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up because it certainly helps, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel, I'd love it if you could, and I'll talk to you at Vlogmas Day 22, I think. Yeah, I think it's going to be 22. Until then, stay safe, stay fabulous. Bye.